Hello, my lads and my ladies, my girls and my boys, and all the beloved pets out there, creatures of land and air and water. Here I am again with yet another episode of Tattle Tales with Sangeeta Bahadur. It's a portal that leads you to a world beyond the one you see and feel and hear around you every day, assuring you that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. In the last episode, a fortnight ago, I introduced you to my own little star who has not only illuminated my life, but has also taught me how to tell stories. I shared with you how her totally chilled attitude towards the supernatural has given me the unashamed scaredy cat the courage to bring spooky experiences and legends from around the world to your ears in my own inimitable style. If you still haven't watched, then you show your little light and listened to the opinions of my very own Sundance kid on all things spooky, you're truly missing something. Once you finish this episode, go listen to that one. And by the way, let me also apologize for the delay in putting out this particular episode today. Rather than a fortnight, it's been 3 weeks again, but there have been a lot of reasons for the delay, not all of them happy ones, but I don't want to bore you with that, so we'll just get on with this particular story. And before we start in earnest, here is the Sundance kid herself who wanted to say hello again to everyone. Come, baby. Come. Sit down. There she is. What do you want to say to everyone?
Hey everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
And why are you here today?
Because I'm talking to you.
And you like it?
And I like it.
And do you think people are going to enjoy the story I'm going to tell today?
Yeah.
You think? Tell them, please enjoy the story.
Please enjoy the story.
And I will see you soon.
And I will see you soon.
And then what do you say before you go?
Bye-bye.
Well, you see, the idea of becoming popular, of having your face known, is alive in every one of us, including the Sundance kid. Her last appearance in the video, which was basically about her, made her taste blood. And now she wants to elbow her way into every episode I do. So you just met her again, and I bet you anything you'll see her again and again as we travel down this path together. Now, the Little Light episode was largely about the joys and challenges of raising her, the Sundance kid, a child with autistic spectrum disorder, or ASD in short. And I do hope it gave you an insight into and compassion for a condition that is still not much understood. However, if you remember, I didn't stray completely from the path of the weird and the wonderful. Even there, I concluded that episode with a strange and rather inexplicable experience that the Sundance Kid and I shared some years ago. We both responded to it in our own typical ways. I with a thumping heart and cold extremities, and she with disdainful humor. But I still wonder sometimes what it was all about. Now, I'm not someone who is, as my dad used to say, attuned to the supernatural wavelength and hence able to see and hear otherworldly entities. I may get terrified in movies like The Exorcist and Dracula and that Bollywood classic Bhoot. And even while reading Stephen King and Edgar Allan Poe. But I'm otherwise pretty insensitive to atmospheres and ripples in the ether. Unlike a lot of women, I do not even claim to be intuitive. So, when a dense, unfeeling clod like me experiences something bizarre and unaccountable, you can bet your next paycheck that there's something to it. As one of the characters in the kids' favorite TV series CID often says, "Kuch to gadbad hai." Something is a little off. Only thrice in my life have I felt the goosebumps of somebody walking on my grave, as the saying goes, and have already shared one of them with you, which happened exactly a decade ago. Yes, I am referring to the anklets in the night incident that I narrated in the last episode. I thought, why not stay on the same track this fortnight as well? I'm calling this episode, this one, Just Guests Like You. A phrase I borrowed from an eerily wistful poem by Stephen Dunn called Sleeping with Ghosts. It begins with the evocative sentence, "The ghosts who've resided for years in those perfectly made beds in houses you visit overnight were once just guests like you, or true inhabitants who died quietly, almost happy, with lights out." Isn't that really eerie and really beautiful? That's where I took the title from. So today, I'm going to tell you about the other two bizarre experiences I've had. One when I was around 15, and the other maybe 12 years ago. I'll begin with the first. A memory so vivid that I still remember every detail as though it happened just yesterday. यही वो जगह है, यही वो फिजा है, यहीं पर कभी आप हमसे मिले थे. We had just moved, bag and baggage, to Ahmedabad in Gujarat, where my father, a high-ranking bureaucrat, had recently been transferred. The first few weeks went by in a flurry of activity, as you can imagine, settling first into a government guest house and then getting us admitted in school, figuring our way around the place, learning our first few words of Gujarati to help ease our daily interactions, and of course, hunting for a house. By the time the truck bearing our luggage hove into view, we had already found a suitable apartment in one of the best neighborhoods in Ahmedabad. A quiet, orderly, green and neat cooperative housing complex. As some of you may know, Gujarat is big on cooperatives in every field, from industrial and agricultural ventures to housing societies, and even, as I discovered to my amused surprise, expenditure on classroom activities. Yep, those kids are trained right from the time they are this high to experiment with cooperation and thus essentially save money. The society we shifted to consisted of low-rise row houses, usually segmented into 2 to 3 apartments. So we moved into a ground floor flat next door to a 1-bedroom apartment occupied, as we found out in due course, by a confirmed bachelor with a common landlord residing on the first floor with his family. It took us a while, obviously, to settle in, open all the 100-odd cartons and turn the house into a home. Then we needed to find a good house help for my mother and figure out the route to the nearest market, post office, and our respective schools. But within a month or so, we were already feeling fairly comfortable in the new setup. This process of getting uprooted every few years and putting down roots again in a totally unknown city was something all of us were accustomed to. Papa's job entailed regular transfers, and unlike some of his colleagues, he didn't believe in settling his family down in one place while he moved around alone. It was a good thing that my brother and I were both born with our share of gypsy genes, and rather than resenting the frequent upheavals, enjoyed the adventure and the exposure. In fact, to tell you the truth, that lifestyle was what led me later in life to join the Foreign Service and become an international gypsy rather than remaining at the national level. So both my brother and I, we were quite used by now to being the new girl or the new boy in class and adept at charming our way into existing and often tight-knit groups of kids who had known each other since their nursery days. Within a fortnight hence, I had been happily embraced by fellow students and teachers. Of course, it helped that I was a bright student who could also sing, debate, act, and was already writing fascinating romances, very much in the Milson Boone style. So these romance novels, I was writing them by hand in lined notebooks. Soon were these stories that were an instant hit in an all-girls school. It was a critical year for me, since I'd be appearing for my 10th board exams within a few months of joining the new school, and I was grateful for the easy acceptance. Initially, we were only on nodding terms with our neighbor, who left for work around the same time we left for school and returned late in the evening. Things changed though when my mother, a wonderful and innovative chef who introduced us to Italian, Russian and Turkish cuisine long before most of India had even heard of those dishes. So she decided to invite the man to dinner. She sincerely believed that a good meal was the quickest way to friendship. Besides, as she pointed out, a confirmed bachelor like him deserved a good meal cooked by somebody other than a maid or himself once in a while. So she went ahead and extended the invitation to dinner, which was happily accepted by Harshit Bhai, which is what we are going to call that gentleman for the purposes of this story. The word Bhai, incidentally, translates to brother in both Gujarati and Hindi, and usually becomes an integral part of a man's given name in Gujarat. Similarly, a woman's name is often suffixed with Ben or sister, so that she'd be addressed as Kokila Ben, Hetal Ben, Jigisa Ben. You get the idea. This often led to confusion and bemusement for non-Gujarati folk like us, who were rather surprised to hear spouses refer to each other as Bhai and Ben, brother and sister. But that was how things are and were in Gujarat. Anyway, Harshit Bhai came home to dinner one Saturday evening, heaped fulsome praises on the lavish spread my mother had laid before us, and exchanged notes with us on a variety of subjects, including recipes, other interests, and hobbies. That was how we discovered that he was a far more interesting specimen than what we had come to expect from his rather ordinary looks, his understated dressing style, his bland demeanor, and boring bank job. His most passionate hobby, he confessed, and one he indulged whenever he was home alone, which was most evenings, was, hold your breath, chatting to random spirits. As we stared at him open-mouthed, he explained that he used a homemade Ouija board for the purpose of summoning dead people. They were, he assured us earnestly, not only happy to take a break from their uneventful afterlife and spend time with him, they also proved to be far more entertaining company than most of his relatives and colleagues. Spirits could share a stimulating, out-of-the-world perspective on most matters were often better informed than the living about the past and the future, and were usually ready to answer most questions the summoner plied them with. The best part is, he confided happily, they don't care who you are and whether they know you at all. When you send out the call, whichever soul is in the vicinity responds and begins communicating with you through the Ouija board. Because you see, some people prefer a pendulum or a three-legged stool, he added knowledgeably, but I find the planchette to be a far more precise method of communication. While the rest of us hung on Harshit Bhai's lips, so to say, my dad reacted with what I can only label as absolute scorn. Despite his one, albeit second-hand experience with the supernatural when he was a teenager, more of that in some other episode, Papa was an uncompromising rationalist who had no patience with otherworldly phenomena, which he regarded as pure, undiluted superstition. You know, now that I think about it, the Sundance Kid has probably inherited her fearless skepticism from her grandfather, even though she never did get to meet him. He died young, you see, full 9 years before she was born. Anyway, let's not get sentimental at this point and return to that evening. So when Harshit Bhai confessed his hobby, Papa proceeded to scoff at the whole idea, informing the man that there was no such thing as ghosts, and even if there was, these spirits would have no interest in communicating with some idiot playing with a Ouija board or a pendulum. When a planchette moved on a Ouija board or a stool tapped its legs, it was nothing but the result of self-hypnosis. People sitting around the table wanted to believe that they had summoned a spirit and subconsciously collaborated with each other in creating the movements. Were I to sit in on a seance, he declared, no planchette would move and no table would dare tap. Harshit Bhai listened patiently and calmly to all the rationality and logic being thrown at him by Papa, before suggesting quietly, if you are so certain that such things don't exist, sir, why don't all of you join me for a seance next Saturday and see what happens? We can keep arguing all night, but as they say, the proof of the pudding lies in the eating. By the end of the session, either I'll have changed my mind or you will have changed yours. Either way, it'll be fun. Papa never could resist a challenge and promptly accepted the invitation. Mummy, on the other hand, forcefully disapproved of the idea. Her wariness was the consequence of the rather terrifying outcome of a seance gone wrong when she was an adolescent. And more of that as well in some other episode. And she didn't want to go through anything of that sort ever again. Papa, of course, irritably dismissed her long ago experience as an excess of imagination and group hysteria, and told her firmly that this time absolutely nothing was going to happen. You needn't come if you don't want to, but I and the kids are definitely going across to call that man's bluff, he announced darkly. Mummy, more scared of being left alone in the house with a seance going on next door than attending it with everyone around her, reluctantly accompanied us next Saturday to Harshit Bhai's small but neat apartment. We went, of course, in the evening, as he had indicated. He had, we found, already created the right ambience before we arrived. Most electric lights had been switched off, candles flickered all over the room, and the heady fragrance of incense pervaded the air. The Ouija board had been set up on a low table with floor cushions laid out for us to sit on. Several sharpened pencils and blank sheets of paper were laid out on a tray next to the table, along with a small steel katori or bowl, normally used for serving, curried vegetables or dal or yogurt. That, he explained cheerfully, would serve as our planchette, while the note-taker would pen the words the summoned spirit would speak through the Ouija board. My brother, who was, I think, only 11, was deemed too young to participate and was relegated to observer status. 3 of us would place our fingers on the planchette, while the 4th would write down the ghostly responses. You, sir, and I will participate in the entire seance as believer and skeptic, he told my smirking dad. Your wife and daughter can take turns joining us at the table. There will be 3 of us communing with the spirit at any given time, while the 4th person jots down the messages. Now, Mummy, still a little apprehensive, opted to be the note-taker for the first round. So, a vastly amused Papa and a curious me joined Harshit Bhai at the Ouija table and placed a finger each on the katori. Our host asked us to focus on the planchette and remain still and quiet while he closed his eyes and began the summoning. Nothing half as dramatic as I had expected. No sonorous mantras were chanted and no ardent entreaties were issued. In a very matter-of-fact tone, he simply called out to any spirit nearby to come join us and speak with us. He repeated this invitation several times, but for a good 5 to 7 minutes, absolutely nothing happened. Papa gave all of us a triumphant look before gazing pityingly at Harshad Bhai, already dismissing him as a delusional eccentric. And then, suddenly, I felt a cool breeze on my hands and inhaled the faintest whiff of a flowery perfume. Very different from the fragrance of the incense burning in a corner. Papa frowned, glancing suspiciously around the small room and then at our host. And I knew he was looking for the source of the breeze and the scent. A small hidden fan, a tiny spray bottle of perfume tucked into Harshad Bhai's palm, perchance. The only fan we could see was the one on the ceiling, and both our host's hands were on the table, one pressing on the bowl and the other open to the sky. A moment later, the little inverted bowl, katori, under our fingers warmed and began to vibrate gently. More of a hum, really, as though a pair of bees were conversing inside. More surprised than scared, I glanced at Harshad Bhai to find him opening his eyes to look at the planchette. "It's here," he said softly, eyes gleaming. "Can you feel the presence?" I nodded, wide-eyed, exchanging a startled look with Mummy. Papa scowled disapprovingly at the little bowl vibrating under our fingertips, daring it to do anything more. The bowl, however, didn't seem to be at all intimidated. Before I could blink, it began to move. Slowly at first, and then at such incredible speed that we could only gasp in astonishment. That is to say, Mummy, my brother, and I could only gasp. Harshad Bhai was smiling fondly at the planchette like a proud parent at a prodigal child, while Papa glared accusingly at it, convinced it was some trick of the mind, a sleight of hand, or the direction of the combined pressure we were applying to the bowl. Meanwhile, the katori itself spun rapidly from letter to letter, pausing at the one it wanted before moving again, with Mummy frantically writing down the words it formed. "Why have you called me?" demanded whoever or whatever was controlling it. And I could feel that wasn't us, consciously or subconsciously. 3 different people, one of them a complete cynic, couldn't possibly be propelling the ball in the same direction and at such inhuman speed, let alone forming perfect words from the jumble of letters and numbers pasted on the Ouija board. I must confess to feeling my hair standing on end as I watched the Katori spin. Without missing a beat, Harshad Bhai said clearly, "Welcome, Spirit. We have summoned you to seek answers to our questions. Are you willing to help us?" He had already told us that an unwilling spirit should just be requested to go back, since it might end up creating mischief. Something to which Mummy had fervently testified based on her own experience of years ago. The planchette vibrated in place for a few seconds, as though the entity, if an entity it really was and not some crazy hoax, as Papa was obviously convinced, was debating what to do. Then the Katori moved again to form a definite yes on the board. "Thank you," Harshad Bhai said graciously, before looking at all of us and suggesting cryptically, "Ask." As Papa was still grinding his teeth at the defiant planchette, I grabbed the opportunity to set the ball rolling. At this distance in time, I don't remember all the questions I asked the spirit, or maybe a collective subconscious, as Papa's theory went. But I must have asked it about maybe half a dozen that evening. The 2 questions I do remember were the ones related to my immediate concern and slightly longer term future. Since my 10th board exams were just around the corner, I was obviously keen to find out how I would perform. "You will do well," announced the Ouija board as Mummy rushed to note down the letters being indicated. Distinction. In case you're curious, that turned out to be perfectly true. I passed the exams with distinction and spent 2 very eventful years pursuing my junior college, or +2, in the city's poshest and most happening high school. My second question pertained to my lifelong passion, traveling around the world, for which at one stage I was all set to become an air hostess. For people of a more recent vintage than me, I should point out that in those pre-liberalization days, traveling abroad was still the privilege and the prerogative of a handful of the rich and famous, a category to which my parents didn't belong. I asked the entity whether I'd ever get to fulfill my impossible sounding dream and was startled by the insouciant response. You will spend a lifetime traveling, it said. And that too happened, folks. Less than a decade later, I joined the Indian Foreign Service and did indeed spend a lifetime traveling. And all this while, Papa sat there with his face flushed with outrage and his index finger totally white as he pressed on the little steel bowl with all his strength, grimly determined to stop its movement, obviously regarding its uncaring defiance as a personal insult. The planchette effortlessly maintained its maniacal speed, spitting out letter after letter, number after number, which all came together to form perfectly organized sentences. As the fear of the unknown slowly sloughed off my fascinated mother, she handed over the paper and pencil to me and replaced me at the table. Again, I don't remember everything she asked, but the eeriness of two responses still haunts me sometimes. Encouraged by the spirit's answer to my query, she asked whether she too would ever get to go abroad. Absolutely, came the prompt answer. Several times, in fact. Gratified, she inquired whether Papa would also do so. For several seconds, the Katori hovered over various letters without stopping at any, almost as though reluctant to form the words. Finally, it spelled out a single word: no. Even Papa looked surprised at the answer, while Mummy took over the job of frowning at the planchette. What do you mean, no? She demanded. How will I go abroad without him? You see, being a traditional Indian woman, she couldn't even visualize a situation where she'd be negotiating international travel, unfamiliar situations, and unknown airports on her own. For the first time that evening, however, the spirit refused to answer and remained stubbornly silent even when she repeated the question. Puzzled, she attempted to trick the entity into some sort of disclosure, and she changed tracks to say slyly, well, if I don't go abroad with my husband, how will I go at all? After all, I have no money and no resources of my own. Traditional woman, homemaker, you get it. And this time, that came the answer. Your daughter will take you. And that, folks, is precisely how things turned out. After putting up a long, agonizing, and truly courageous fight, Papa succumbed to multiple organ failure, probably brought about by his old and often ignored diabetic condition. Barely 4 years after I joined the Foreign Service. Struggling to stay alive, he couldn't even plan to visit me in distant Spain. Maybe that was why the spirit infusing the Ouija board had refused to answer Mummy's question. Following the very sensible abjuration that many of the living so bleakly ignore. If you have nothing good to say, keep your mouth shut. Mummy, on the other hand, joined me on several of my subsequent postings after Papa's death, learning to negotiate strange airports, aircrafts, and cities, including Rome, which had been on her bucket list since her college days. She even breathed her last while living with me in Minsk. You might dismiss the entire episode from the answers we were given to the way things unfolded to corroborate them as some sort of group hypnosis or self-induced prophecies, but, well, can you really explain it all away as mere coincidence or random chance? I mean, 99% of what we were told that evening actually transpired over time, including the answer to a single and very reluctant question involving a time-bound event posed at the end by my still offended but cautiously curious father. And even that answer came true. Could three vastly different individuals possibly have linked their brainwaves into such complete harmony and to such spectacular effect? Also, the sheer speed and accuracy of the planchette in forming rapid sentences is something I still cannot explain. If it wasn't being controlled by some otherworldly entity, how on earth was it moving like lightning unleashed? Particularly with Papa battling with all his might to stop it in its tracks. He never conceded defeat in so many words to a beatifically smiling Harshad Bhai. But after that experience, I don't recall him ever again being militantly dismissive of such things. If the topic arose, he'd simply go quiet. The closest thing to acceptance that could be expected of someone like him, raised on a diet of the scientific temper that had been made into a war cry for his generation by the post-independence political leadership. Well, I hope I've managed to give you some of the heebie-jeebies with this account of my very first encounter with the inexplicable long years ago. And as I told you, there is one more such encounter that I will be talking to you about Initially, I thought I'll talk about both of them in the same episode, but then the Sundance Kid and I decided, why spoil the fun?
Why
Right?
spoil the fun?
We will do one more episode
Yeah,
with the
we will.
second story, which is, trust me, far spookier than this one. And we will bring it to you next fortnight. And so here we are, the Sundance Kid and I, to say our goodbyes. See you later, alligator. Yes. Okay, so there she goes, and there I go too. In the meanwhile, please like the channel, subscribe to it if you haven't, share it with friends, family, relatives, colleagues, students, whoever in the world you can think of, so that all the creativity and all the time and energy I put into creating these episodes feels worth it to me. In the meanwhile, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon, next fortnight most probably. But do forgive me if there is a slight delay, but I'll try to be on time. Bye.